My dear friend, there is a certain sorrow that only those who are chosen by God truly understand. It is not the sorrow of punishment, nor the sorrow of being forgotten. It is the sorrow of being included in a divine plan too grand for our human hearts to wholly bear. You, chosen one, are not merely seen. You are known. You are held, shaped, and sent. And yet, with that sacred calling comes a truth not easily swallowed. He loves you deeply. But he let her in too. To understand divine love, we must first acknowledge that it does not operate under human limitations. Our instinct, trained by experience and the scarcity of human affection, tells us that if love is given to another, less remains for us. We view love as a finite resource, a pie to be divided, and in doing so, we begin to fear that someone else's blessing is our loss. But this fear is rooted in flawed logic, not in the truth of who God is. God's love is not divided among his children. It is multiplied. His love does not shrink when shared. It expands. Imagine a candle lighting another candle. The first flame does not diminish. Instead, there are now two sources of light. This is how divine love functions, endlessly generous, powerfully infinite. You are not loved less because someone else is loved. You are not less seen because someone else enters the room. God's affection is not a hierarchy of worth, but a fountain from which all may drink and none go thirsty. This truth is both comforting and humbling because it reminds us that the essence of divine love is not competition, but communion. When God chooses to let someone else into a space you once held alone, whether in ministry, relationship, calling, or influence, it is easy to feel replaced. The enemy whispers that you are being pushed aside, forgotten, downgraded. But those are lies woven from the threads of earthly thinking. God's love is not like man's love. It is not insecure. It does not require the exclusion of others to be meaningful. Instead, it invites, includes, and multiplies purpose through unexpected arrivals. The inclusion of another is not the cancellation of you. It is often the continuation of a bigger, richer story. To be loved by God is to be held in the full awareness of your flaws, your needs, your potential, and still be embraced without hesitation. That is not something he revokes when someone new steps into your sphere. His love for you was never based on performance, therefore it is not threatened by the presence of another. This is one of the most liberating truths a soul can grasp. You are not in a race for God's attention. You are not fighting for space in his heart. You already have it, fully, permanently. But divine love is also wise. It does not spoil or flatter for the sake of comfort. It invites growth, even when growth hurts. Sometimes, God's way of growing us is to allow others into our sacred spaces, not to humiliate us, but to humble us, not to punish us, but to reveal to us the depths of our own heart. When someone else is let in, especially someone who seems unqualified or unexpected, it tests whether we truly understand love in its divine form, or whether we only accepted love when it felt like exclusive approval. If you can believe that God still loves you just as fiercely, just as intimately, even when he lets her in, then you have matured in faith. You have passed from milk to meat, from surface understanding to spiritual depth. You have understood that love does not decrease when others are blessed. Instead, you begin to see others not as threats, but as fellow recipients of the same unearned grace that covers you. God's love does not operate in percentages. He is not giving you 70% today because he had to give her 30%. That is not divine accounting. That is human insecurity masquerading as theology. God's love is whole, full, and personal to each of his children. His ability to love you completely is not hindered by his decision to love someone else completely too. So when God lets her into your circle, your calling, your story, do not despair. Do not spiral into doubt. Do not withdraw in fear. Instead, remember the unshakable truth. You are still chosen. You are still loved. Her inclusion does not rewrite your identity. It refines your understanding of God's nature. And in that refinement, you become more like the one who chose you. You learn to love without fear, to welcome without suspicion, and to trust that your place in His heart has never been up for debate. To be chosen by God is one of the most profound honors a soul can receive, but it is not always what people assume it is. Being chosen does not mean being preferred in the way we think of favoritism. It does not imply superiority or elevation above others for the sake of ego. It means being selected for purpose, divine assignment that may carry both great glory and deep burden. We must distinguish preference from purpose if we want to walk humbly in what God has placed upon us. When we confuse being chosen with being more loved, we begin to resent others whom God brings into our story. But if we understand that to be chosen is to be purposed, then we can see others not as rivals, but as part of a larger unfolding. God's choosing is not a rejection of others. He does not operate in a limited system where only one can be elevated while the rest are overlooked. That kind of logic is born in boardrooms, not in the throne room. Divine purpose is layered, complex, and deeply personalized. You were chosen not because you were better, but because your life carries a weight designed to fulfill a specific need in God's eternal plan. It is not about worth, it is about alignment. You were shaped for something, and being chosen is God's way of saying, I made you for this. That should bring awe, not arrogance, when God lets someone else into the sphere you thought was yours alone. It tests the purity of your understanding. It is easy to celebrate your calling when you are the only one in the room. It is harder when another walks in, gifted, equipped, and welcomed by the same God who called you. But if your calling is rooted in purpose, and not in the praise it brings, then you will not be shaken. You will not feel the need to defend what God Himself established. The chosen must always remember that their strength is in obedience, not position. You were not chosen to be seen. You were chosen to be sent. It's important to understand that being chosen also carries weight. It is not a golden medal to wear. It is a mantle to bear. Many want the glory of being chosen, but not the suffering it often includes. Yet every person chosen in Scripture, Abraham, Moses, Esther, Mary, Paul, was called into difficulty, sacrifice, and surrender. Their choosing meant they would walk paths others would not understand. It meant they would often be alone, misunderstood, even rejected. But they endured because they understood the purpose was bigger than their comfort. So when God allows another into the arena you thought was yours, perhaps she is a new leader, a new voice, a new presence, you must resist the lie that her entrance diminishes your importance. The one who is truly chosen does not fear comparison. They are not threatened by another's success. They understand that God's kingdom is not a stage with one spotlight, but a field with many laborers. Each worker matters. Each voice has a tone. Each life plays a part. If you begin to see your role through the lens of purpose rather than preference, you will find freedom. You will no longer cling to being first or being seen. You will instead hunger to be faithful. God's call on your life is unique, but not exclusive. Others will be called. Others will be used, and that is not a threat. It is a promise that God is doing more than you imagine. Sometimes the people He lets in are not replacements, but reinforcements. They are not there to undo you, but to unlock something deeper in you. Perhaps they are a test. Perhaps they are a teacher. Perhaps they are even a partner in purpose you never knew you needed. Whatever the reason, let your heart stay anchored in this truth. Being chosen is not about being better. It is about being willing. It is about saying yes when others would say no. It is about carrying the weight of purpose, even when applause fades and questions rise. And if God lets her in, He hasn't changed His mind about you. He's simply revealing that His purpose includes more than you ever saw from your limited view. Be faithful in your purpose. That is the true mark of the chosen. There is a particular ache that settles into the heart when someone else is welcomed into a space we once believed was ours alone, especially when that space feels sacred, when it carries history, memory, or divine promise. The presence of another can feel intrusive, disorienting, even painful. We wrestle with the thought, if I was truly loved, truly chosen, why would God allow her to step into this part of my story? It is in that moment that many misinterpret divine intention, believing that the arrival of another must be evidence of their own rejection. But that assumption is rooted in fear, not truth. The presence of another is not a rejection of you. It is often the beginning of something more profound than you imagined. God does not operate by subtraction when He builds our lives. He adds, refines, stretches, and transforms. When He lets someone else into your story, especially someone you didn't expect, it's not because you failed or lost your favor. It's because there's something in the presence of that person that will sharpen you, shape you, or stretch your perspective in ways solitude never could. That sharpening might feel like suffering at first. The ego will want to recoil, to compare, to question. But beneath the discomfort lies opportunity to grow in grace, to deepen in humility, and to discover a new layer of God's design for you. We must be honest. Jealousy is not always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet ache, a subtle distance we begin to place between ourselves and others, especially the ones we believe have taken something we thought belonged to us. But that ache, if not confronted, will grow into bitterness. And bitterness poisons blessings. What God meant as an expansion can become a source of torment if we view it through the lens of insecurity rather than faith. If we choose to see her presence as proof that we are being replaced, we will miss the deeper reality. She was never the problem. The issue is the belief that our value is fragile, conditional, or exclusive. But you were never called to compete. You were called to complete a purpose. And in God's divine orchestration, He often introduces people, not to erase your significance, but to reveal what's unfinished in you. Perhaps she reflects a strength you lack or a lesson you need. Perhaps her story intersects with yours not to diminish it, but to magnify it in a way that isolation never could. The truth is, we often grow most when we're challenged to love beyond our comfort, when we're asked to see someone not as a threat, but as a sister. That's not easy. It goes against our pride, but it aligns us with the humility of Christ. Consider how often in Scripture someone new is brought into a narrative already unfolding. Ruth enters Naomi's story, and her loyalty leads to legacy. Mary enters Elizabeth's season, and together their wombs carry 2 revolutions. Paul enters a church that once feared him, and the entire Gentile world is changed. God never adds people randomly. When He lets someone in, it's because their presence serves a divine function, even if that function is to humble, refine, or heal us in unseen ways. So if God let her in, don't assume it's because you are less loved. Don't assume it's because your time is up or your role is forgotten. Her presence may be the very thing that activates the next part of your purpose. Or it may be the mirror you needed to confront a part of your heart God has long wanted to heal. Either way, it is not a demotion. It is an invitation to trust the author of your story more than your interpretation of the plot. You are not being replaced. You are being reminded that love does not close doors when it opens others. God's kingdom is big enough for both of you. His love is personal enough to be complete for you and for her. And His plan is wise enough to know that her presence does not subtract from you. It stretches you into the next version of yourself, the one that looks more like him. So breathe, let go of the fear, and choose to believe this one simple truth. Her presence is not your rejection. It may very well be your revelation. It is one of the hardest lessons for the human soul to learn, that God's ways are not confined to our logic. We crave order, predictability, symmetry. We want events to align with our understanding of fairness, timelines to match our expectations, and outcomes to affirm our efforts. But the economy of heaven rarely consults the preferences of the flesh. When God orchestrates events, relationships, arrivals, and departures, he is not bound by our sense of control. And so, when someone enters our story unexpectedly, especially someone we did not choose, did not welcome, or do not understand, we are faced with a painful yet holy invitation to surrender our limited perspective and trust the broader narrative God is writing. The chosen are not immune to confusion. In fact, they often walk through seasons of deep uncertainty precisely because they are part of something larger than they can comprehend. The chosen walk paths where explanations are scarce, but obedience is required. And one of the clearest marks of spiritual maturity is the ability to say, God, I don't understand this, but I still trust you. It is a statement not of resignation, but of reverence. To admit that his story is bigger than our sight is not weakness. It is wisdom. When someone is allowed into a chapter of our lives that feels personal, sacred, even promised, especially her, it tests that very wisdom. It challenges the soul with questions that ache in private. Why her? Why now? What does this mean for me? The temptation in those moments is to retreat into suspicion or to spiral into self-doubt. But that is where faith must rise. Not the kind of faith that demands answers, but the kind that endures without them. The faith that says, even though I don't see the full picture, I know the artist is still at work. Throughout Scripture, God constantly worked in ways that confounded human expectation. He called the younger over the older. He sent kings through shepherds and prophets through exiles. He used barren wombs to birth nations and broken people to build altars. His movements are rarely predictable, but they are always intentional. And so, when he lets someone else into a space you thought was reserved for you, it's not because he's forgotten the promise. It's because he's fulfilling it in a way that goes beyond your version of the plan. One of the greatest spiritual dangers is assuming that our interpretation of a promise is the same as its fulfillment. We often take a word from God and dress it with our expectations. Then, when reality unfolds differently, we feel betrayed. But God never promised to follow our script. He promised to complete his work in his way, and if his way includes another person, perhaps someone we didn't see coming, it does not mean the promise has changed. It means the process is deeper than we imagined. The presence of another in your story does not mean your part is over. It may mean it's evolving. It may mean your character is being refined, or it may mean your role is expanding to include elements you could never have predicted. Either way, the story is still yours. It's just no longer confined to your comfort. In such moments, it is essential to choose humility over hostility, faith over fear, and awe over accusation. God is not against you. He is not replacing you. He is simply revealing that the story you're in is part of something eternal, something that may take years or even a lifetime to fully understand. That's why trust becomes the most powerful act of worship. To trust God's pen even when you don't like the current sentences to declare, "You are God and I am not." So, when she is allowed in, and you don't understand it, when her presence causes questions to rise and fears to stir, take a breath and remember this. The author of your life has not abandoned the story. He is not rewriting your ending. He is simply building something too glorious to fit into your current understanding. You will see it in time. Until then, walk forward not by sight, but by trust. The kind of trust that believes even the confusing chapters are part of the masterpiece.